do it.
Sure, Commissioner, I'll call off the folks that had responded and received the invite. And then, of course, if I'm missing anyone, please let me know. Jerry Abrahams.
Here.
Phil DeFranzo.
Here.
Tim Hodges. Catherine McKinnon.
Here.
Commissioner Mosquera Bruno.
Here.
Franklin Perry. Lisa Tepper Bates.
Here.
Greg Ugalde.
Here.
Are there any board members that I missed, please? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going next.
So Nancy's going next. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm going to give a very brief introduction because I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but as the commissioner said, we are currently going to review, we're going to review our 2-year QAP, which was over 22 and 23. And, you know, I think the qualified allocation plan is a document that sets out the state's policy priorities, as well as eligibility criteria, threshold criteria, and other specifics relating to how the state would award the competitive 9% federal low-income housing tax credit and the non-competitive 4% low-income housing tax credits. Because this is our first meeting with all of you, we are hoping to do a review of our current QAP, so a walkthrough of the document. Terry Nash and Deb are going to take that on. We do intend to do engagement with the affordable housing community, and that's going to be laid out in a timeline that we have that Terry will present after the review of the QAP. Thank you for your participation, and we're not intending to do a major rewrite, I don't believe. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. However, we do have some areas of interest and discussion that we want to highlight, which Pat will talk about after the review of the QAP. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry and Deb to walk us through the existing document.
I'm going to ask Terry to take the lead.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for all who volunteered to participate in this review. It's important work, and we really appreciate your guidance. So the QAP is laid out as a policy document with the governing authority first being put first and center, so that we see what's the statutory authority, what's our obligation in accordance with the Internal Revenue Code and Connecticut general statutes. So that I'll call it a preamble. That first part just really lays out what our framework is. After governing authority is the state housing plans, and this too describes policy that's been implemented by the state. So current state policy is laid out through major policy documents published by both the Department of Housing and the Office of Policy and Management. So you have the Consolidated Plan for Housing and Community Development and the Conservation and Development Policies, or we call it the C&D Policies Plan, and the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice 2015. That 2015 is in the title. It doesn't reflect like a revision date, but I think that causes some confusion from time to time. These policies that are articulated in these large policy documents are then just briefly described through state housing plans. So we adopt by this document the state's policy goals. So we have the CON plan, the idea to develop decent, safe, affordable housing for all, to ensure suitable living environments, expand economic opportunities, principally for low and moderate income persons. Again, that ties in with our mission as well. If you could scroll down a little more, we get to the credit award process. This section is important because it gives applicants a chance to understand how their application is reviewed and the competitive components awarded. So as you know, there's 2 tranches, and I'll get to those in a minute, but I just want to point out that only the new construction development proposals are awarded competitively through the points process. The preservation is a separate classification. So each one that is submitted has to come in and meet certain threshold requirements. These are articulated, as well as minimums, or I'm sorry, maximums of use of credits. So there's a certain amount they cannot go beyond in requesting for the 9% credits. And again, it articulates the fact that whatever we're doing and whatever the applicant is doing must meet the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code and the articulated goals of the state policy plans. If an applicant submits after the deadline, of course, there's a cutoff. So we have a very tight timeline for when applications can come in, be reviewed, and presented to the board for approval. These are the threshold requirements. I think there's a close to 20, I want to say. So yeah, so they're articulated 1 through 20. And an application comes in, meets those threshold requirements, and then moves on to further consideration. If for any reason they miss a threshold requirement, it's essentially not a default. It's not a forgivable thing. It's not something you can say, oh, hey, you forgot to, give us your XYZ. You've missed your threshold requirements. So applicants are very mindful of this. They have to come in, for example, with a feasible plan, feasible proposal, balanced sources and uses. And so they must have all of that in place, and they're very aware of that. This has been a very successful way of making sure that everybody comes in and is on the same page. Everybody, for example, everybody needs a market study. Those are, it's all described pretty clearly 1 through 20. After this, we start to talk about the classifications and the point structure. I don't know who's driving the bus here. If you could just scroll down a little bit. Thank you. Okay, so this is what I was talking about earlier, where we decided in late 21 to change the classifications to new construction and preservation, simply to recognize that they're 2 discrete and very different types of development processes. And it was very difficult with our point structure for the folks proposing preservation deals. Recognizing still that the priority is to create new units, the goal for us in this last QAP was to split the credits roughly 75% new construction, 25% preservation. But these preservation deals are important too, because you have a lot of aging stock that really needs to be improved, re-syndicated, and the quality of life of the residents supported. So we have in the preservation classification no points, but rather some criteria that we're looking to see are met. This isn't like we explain to developers too. This isn't like a list that you have to say, oh, the most expensive one is going to be the winner because we've mentioned largest scope of rehab work is number 1, but rather all these things are considered collectively, and then the ones that will be successful will rise to the top. The other classification is the new construction, and that is the classification that is ranked with the points categories. So 75%, as I mentioned, of our credits will be dedicated to the new construction deals, and the points are important to try to drive the production where and how we'd like it to be. Rental affordability has historically been our greatest priority. I think for at least the last 10, 12 years, it's had the heaviest weight in terms of points in the QAP. So within rental affordability, there's subcategories of supportive housing, deep income targeting, mixed income households, that mix in the middle of 30 to 50% AMI, and the resident services coordinator, and extended affordability commitment as well. Financial efficiency and sustainability is the next heaviest weighted category of points. And in that, we talk about cost effectiveness and hard costs, the use of credit equity, credits per bedroom, here trying to encourage the development of larger units for families. A lot of times we see that there's a need for 3-bedroom units, not so much the ones in some communities. Scrolling down, if you would. Thank you. Local impact is, again, this is a criteria that's in OPM's C&D policies plan to support use of land resources in a way that maximizes the area, the communities, the natural resources, and utilizes the existing infrastructure. So we talk about location, transit-oriented development. Is it a family development? Do they have QCT or brownfield development possibilities? And then the concerted community revitalization plan and or affordable housing plan ties us to the goal of having every community, every municipality implementing an affordable housing plan. So we're encouraging that with 3 points. So you can see each of the categories has a subcategory and a level of points associated with it that will indicate to the developers how we view the importance or the priority of those goals. Opportunity characteristics is the next category. And here we're trying to introduce family housing into areas that ostensibly provide, greater educational opportunities or access to jobs or amenities that they might not otherwise have access to. And it also ties to municipalities with less deed restricted housing as through the 830G list that DOH maintains. And we also have a section, I don't know if it's next or if I passed it, but what's after opportunity characteristics? No, okay, so there is a section that talks about its financial feasibility, and I was remiss in not mentioning that that is where the sustainability points come in. And we're very proud of the work that was done over the last QAP to include a lot of various options to maximize energy efficiencies without incurring expense for trying to incentivize something that's unrealistic in certain types of developments. So there's lots of options, and developers can mix and match and choose what fits their needs the best, and will still achieve the highest energy efficiency available in that particular development. We talk about how we might have tiebreakers if that were a need, how we might, we do definitely have to have a set aside for qualified nonprofits, and that's within that's part of the Internal Revenue Code, and that's within the 2 classifications. So we've always managed to balance that very well without having to, carve out some specific dollar amount to meet that need. So, and after that, we get into the conversation of what exactly are the points and what it's about. So this whole next section will talk about that overview that I just gave you. It breaks it down in detail. So rental affordability is the number 1. And then each of those categories where you could gain points is described more thoroughly and tells you how exactly you can get the points. So for the households at or below 30% aggregate median income, points, it tells you points will be awarded based on the percentage of qualified units serving households at or below 30% of AMI. and provide rents in accordance with HUD guidelines. So if you were doing, say, more than 25% of the total units in your development, you get the maximum points. As developers choose to mix, a lot of times they'll have, it looks almost like a bell curve where they have some on one end that are deep income targeted, some on the other end that are market rate, and then all the continuum in the middle is the other AMI bands. So you'll see going up, a lot of times they'll maximize those points. And we'll have a nice mixed income development created as a result. There are also points for mixed income, so that benefits folks as well. Did you want to go through each points category individually, or just this section is enough for you to know? You know, that each points are broken down. So I'm happy to go into it in more detail, but as you can see, as you scroll down after rental affordability, each section is treated in the same way. That just is a deeper dive into the sections that we talked about earlier.
So, members of the task force, do you want to go over that, or do you want to go yourself? And then if you have questions at the next meeting, we can discuss it in further detail. Would that work?
I vote for the latter.
I agree.
Same.
I think also, oh, I'm sorry, Greg. I think also I'd like to suggest that since we have some time on this, and I think my understanding, and please confirm, is that since it is 2-year, we're not looking to make changes, but we can look forward to a next 2-year QAP. And what I'd like to ask about is whether we can think a little bit more creatively about how we engage with actual developers to understand their feedback. In the past, and Terry, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the past it's mostly been in writing, and then all of that feedback is sort of consolidated very, very helpfully, Terry, by, I think you, generally speaking, by staff, but by you, which is a lot of work. We're always grateful to you for what you do on that. But I'd like to ask if we could also think about the prospect of putting out a question perhaps to developers if they would be interested in engaging with staff and board members to do some focus group style discussions about the QAP. So, you know, I think all of us, or I won't speak for everyone, but I know that I, from time to time, get phone calls from developers wanting to ask questions, discuss, provide feedback. I think it'd be so much more helpful to do that in a structured way where we're all hearing the same thing at the same time. And I don't know that we've done that before. To my recollection, I don't think we have. But I'd love to think with the staff and with the chair about a way to maybe solicit from developers whether they engage, whether they'd like to, and then if they would, to maybe create a process where we could do that and actually sit around a table or by Zoom and hear those comments in a little bit more of an engaging way. Is that something, Terry, that we've done before? And if it isn't, is it something?
We did actually, but you know what? We didn't invite the board, and maybe that's something we want to do.
Let Terry know. So Lisa, thank you for that. And we are planning to do that. So I'm gonna ask Pat, because what we're going to do, they're going to set up focus group with the developers.
Yes.
And we will let you know the board members that can come, right? Because
Yes.
sometimes we can align our calendars, but once we set up dates and time to meet with the developers, we will send also the information to the board members that want to attend to those focus groups.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Lisa, you're right on point. That's exactly what we want to do this time around. We want to engage developers. This was done 10, 12 years ago. And now we want to reinstitute it. We're looking at a broad swath across. We obviously can't have every developer participate, but we're looking for a representation across the spectrum. We're looking at nonprofit developers. We're looking at for-profit developers. We're looking at our big three. We're looking to include even going with the consultants, the consultants that participate in this. So that we can get a broad understanding of what people's thoughts are and how we might improve our QAP.
Pat, can we also include in that? So it's
And I totally think that's the right thing to do. They're essentially a consumer of a financing product, right? But we should maybe think of including in that process, so we don't create a new process, also non-developer stakeholders, right? So if there are advocacy groups who deal with housing issues and affordability issues away from the actual development process, because they're really stakeholders here too, not just developers. I'm speaking on behalf of sort of for-profit developers. They're going to have a particular perspective. It's okay. They're a customer, but it's only one perspective of many. The nonprofit developers have another. And so we could include that, also have people at the table who are either focused on advocacy or equity or some of those issues. We should, or sustainability.
Yeah.
From that perspective, I think it'd be good to have them, their voice included in the process.
So we, a couple of years ago, we did a lot of work with the sustainability community.
Yes,
To their very great satisfaction, actually. So, and I just spoke in front of them a week ago, and they're very, very pleased with all the work that we did. So I think we've covered that basis, or that base rather, but certainly we can think about other.
So I think that to Jess's point, there are two other groups, right? So if we bring as for-profit, nonprofit, the advocates, but there is also the service providers, because the service providers are part of
Right,
this
there you go,
QAP with the supported services. So those groups, we can have several with everybody together, because we usually tend to separate them and we don't hear the different issues that each group have in operating what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think you want them in the room at the same time.
Yes, you want them to
Because just so, it's maybe make a little longer meeting, you have to be a little rest there, but you kind of want the give and take, right? And you also, then you don't have to have, like, it makes your process a little simpler.
Right. We just have to be careful. I did participate the last time around, and when the group gets too big, it really, really loses focus quickly. And we're not looking at this point to do a major overhaul of the existing document. We know there's some tweaks. We've heard from the industry that there's some tweaks. I think we have a very good representation of the entire spectrum, including stakeholders. And we can have you can do a couple of sessions with groups like all together, like four and I mean, you can
grouping.
you can do 2 sessions, so you don't have a big group that you have to manage, but it's smaller, but with all the components.
We choose not to revise the QAP on stuff because we have to balance it, right?
Exactly.
We're not doing a major overhaul. I still think it's important for us to have a forum for people to be heard.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I just suggest, Pat, it would be great if we actually had, before you kind of put all that together, to understand what it's going to look like. I mean, meaning the board members to understand what your plan is. I agree with Sela completely. And we could do a few of these. And then to Lisa's point, it's not like we're way ahead of this at this point. So to the extent that we can get more input from folks, I think would be good, because even if we use that input for the next time, that would be helpful. And I would, look, as much as I hate to include everyone, but it'd be great to get perspectives from even syndicators, right? I mean, I've talked to a few of them about the process as well. But if the more input we can get, I think it makes it better for all of us in terms of making decisions and how we come to conclusions.
Thank you.
We're not that far ahead, right? Because this last round was year 2 of the 2-year QAP, right? So applications that are submitted next January would be part of this new QAP we're going to talk about, right?
yes.
So
We have a time.
yeah,
We're actually on a fairly tight schedule to get this
yeah,
completed and presented.
yeah.
But we could
That's
always
what I was thinking.
input into the next 2-year QAP or do research based on what we're
If-
hearing.
if there are big issues that people have that we need to do a little more research,
Yeah.
so those will put it on our
Shelf.
parking lot,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah,
getting the information and do it for next year, we can start earlier than January.
And the task force or board can always make a decision to have this be a 1-year QAP. If they see that the feedback is significant and they want to make a different decision, we can do that and
Yeah.
then move forward on that basis.
Sure.
Yeah. Would it make sense too to,
Let's say that.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page with this. We wanna, we want to garner that information from our stakeholders. So that's the very purpose of this, and we appreciate your discussion about it. We will look to expand it if we don't have everybody included, to make sure that everybody gets a voice in this process.
And Pat, that's a great point, but I just want to maybe pause for a moment. There are two different ways to think about it. It's important to give everyone the opportunity for input, for certain. But what I think I have in mind, and I don't know if this resonates with others, but instead of a sort of big hearing with 100 people, which maybe you do that too, right? But it would be really useful to have a smaller setting to really hear in more detail what does this process look like when you're the person who has to live through it and has to apply according to it, right? And so if there's a way to do both of those things, maybe have a few smaller group, more like a focus group, and have a process to collect the larger, the larger universe of input, that'd be great. But if there are 100 people in a meeting, you don't really have the opportunity to go into a little bit more depth about what people are going through, because what I often hear are the unintended consequences. And you have to kind of walk through with somebody how the process played out to understand that. And that would give us a deeper level of understanding to think about the way this is written and the details. Because I started this discussion because we were asked, do you want to go over the details? And personally, I don't want to do that right now. I want to understand from people who have to do the process before I go back and look at the way we've structured it, because I think that would give us all a better way to really be productive and create the best product.
Yeah, no, we are talking about the same thing, Lisa. It's smaller groups that have all the components and that have that conversation and the issues that they have operating or doing the application. So exactly that. We don't want to be big group, but we can do a couple. Thank you.
would it make sense to try and solicit some input either from municipalities or legislators? I remember the last time around, there was a group of legislators from Eastern Connecticut that felt like, they got, were, adversely affected by the new QAP. I mean, would it make sense to at least solicit input in terms of what communities might think the need is, in their areas?
No. No legislators. No, I think Kathy, your point is well taken, but I think it's probably a separate discussion, because legislators to a great extent don't understand how this works, right? They are reacting in terms of what their constituents are saying. So, but I think it's a good point, right? Which is maybe we figure out through some process how people are feeling about their areas.
Well, I think it could be sort of its own little focus group, maybe, because it would be a different discussion for sure.
To Tim's point, I think we could do, once we get kind of a draft, we could have a conversation.
Okay.
Where we go.
Okay.
It's probably different way to approach them.
And I think Tim's right. You probably want to do that in a very informal way. Maybe commissioner that we leave that in your field.
I'll say that. Nice, guys. Okay, so any other comments, or Terry, are you continuing with the?
Sure. So I will mention that the reason we have that big giant public hearing is just because it's part of the statutory requirement that we just have a public hearing for a policy document. So it's been very informative to have the smaller focus groups, and you get more voices when it's a smaller forum, as you're mentioning. So I'm excited about that. And the written comments will still come in as they always do. All right, so I think if we're going to just review the QAP on our own and then come back with questions next time, we can bring up the planning document. And this is a draft that just sort of lays out how we would approach the work of the coming year. And I don't know if you have it, Dawn, or if you want me to share it. I will share it. I think I can share it.
Thanks, Terry. I don't think I have it.
Okay, let me see if I can find my screen. And I want this. Okay. So this is just to put down on paper how we expect to have the activities occur for the coming year. And it's very flexible, only assumes one meeting a month right after the board meetings. Last time we had a tremendous changes occurring and we had some special meetings in between. And you may want to do that too, but this is just thinking about the structure of one meeting each month, excluding August and of course December. So we started with today's first meeting talking about the QAP. We'll continue our discussions in February and start to talk about the changes we might want to implement so that by March we're able to give you a draft with changes in it. We'll look between now and say April for public input and do some outreach and make sure that we've kind of, as you've just described, touched on a lot of different bases and met with lots of different groups and get some input that will inform the second draft that you'll look at in April. Based on your meeting, we will have a final draft to present to the board of directors to authorize the public hearing and comment period. That's the public hearing that we have to have. So that's the May board meeting. The public hearing and comment period would occur the first part of June. And the third draft would be, and the summary of comments would be presented to you in June 29th. That's right after the June board meeting. And then based on your recommendation, either we recommend to the board of directors that QAP for approval in July, or there are additional changes to be made. But the board should approve the QAP at its July meeting so that the governor can approve and sign in August, and the rest of the process that's structural follows, with the overview session occurring for developers in September, all the guidelines published online in October, the pre-applications becoming due in November, and pre-application conferences and taxable bond financing letters being completed and issued in December. That would give us applications due in our normal timeline of mid-January of 2024. So you see, it is aggressive and we're only meeting once a month. But if you recall, if we're not making huge changes, I think this will really fit. Last year with the, not last year, 2 years ago with the overhaul, we really did have a lot more work to do. And I think that's where Tim was referring to. We're ahead of the game because we don't really have as many huge changes occurring as we did in when we were looking at this in 21.
So just seeing this timeline in reacting, I also agree that the face-to-face input is going to be so valuable. You know, the different, one of the things I think that we really have to consider then is a virtual component, because I think it's, you know, looking at this, I think it's going to be real difficult to get everybody together so many times or even a few times. Maybe as long as we can record and have the ability to review, is that interaction will be valuable even if you're not there in person, I think. And it just expands our ability to get input. You know, first choice, of course, you want to be there, but I think it just gives us more flexibility, because while we have the time, it's still nearly impossible when you try to get a bunch of busy people to a number of different things.
Yeah,
Right, it's a 2-hour block, right?
Yeah, that's our intent. It's our intent, and just so everybody knows, we're targeting the first 2 weeks for our first meeting with the outside groups. So
In February, you mean?
in February, yeah, I'm sorry.
Is it?
Oh. First 2 weeks in February, sorry.
All right, yeah, I think that time frame is doable.
Okay.
Any other comments on the time frame? All right,
Pat's gonna talk about. Just some,
Just
some thoughts.
Yeah, just to generate some thoughts that we'd like you guys to keep in your brain as we move forward with this. So there's some items that we've been, Nandini and I have been going over the past couple of months. Some things for consideration in this new QAP might be site quality, so the quality of the site, location of the site. Some other neighboring states have similar requirements or offer points for a similar requirement. So we've also we want you to consider per unit cost limitations, and we've had this conversation numerous times in board presentations about what's the upper limit that we're willing to allow for a project to be considered an affordable development. We'd also like to talk about developer equity, whether or not we will require developers to actually have a percentage of the project in equity contributed. And if we want to revisit the readiness to proceed, so in other words, make sure they're further along in all of their construction drawings and approvals and such, so that once we do the allocation, we can move to closing more quickly, and they could bring us better pricing, stronger pricing up front, pricing that we know will stay in effect until the projects are closed, and we'll be able to avoid the gaps we saw in the past 2 years. And supplemental allocations, if we want to set any of the credits aside for a second allocation, so that if we do the allocations to the first group, if any of them suffers increased costs or delays that increase the cost and they create gaps, if we wanted to hold some back for a later allocation to be able to fill those gaps. We've also talked, and it's not on my list, but we've also talked about whether or not we want to expand the ceiling for credits per unit and credits in total for a project. Right now, to remind you, it's $30,000 per unit that we allow, and we've checked with some neighboring states, and they're they're about the same. So it's just something that we can talk about. And then finally, hybrids, or you may have heard them referred to as twinnings. And this is where there's excess basis or leftover basis on the 9% side created by our caps. And they are subsequently used in a 4% twinned transaction. That's a way that they've been able to the developers have been able to access that excess basis and be able to utilize it. Right now, the way we have it worded in our current QAP limits the way other states developers may access it, and that's a fairly easy fix, but it's something that has been a priority fix for the QAP. So those are just some topics we want everybody to think about.
Pat, I don't have enough space in the back of my brain for all the stuff that you just listed. Like, that's a lot of stuff. I recommend we take some time in one of the meetings, because some of those items, while some of those are really important items, absolutely all of them, but it would take more discussion than me just kind of thinking about a couple of those and coming back with recommendations.
Okay. What I'll do,
We can use some of the focus groups
yes,
to highlight some of these areas, or at least be listening to see if any of these are reflecting in those conversations.
yeah, I'd like to circulate the list to the team,
Sure.
to the task force, so that everybody at least understands what we're looking at, and we can and if anybody wants to talk about what they are, everybody's always free to give me a call directly, and I can talk you through it. Or we can just put it on a future agenda just to go over them again.
Pat, thank you for that. I appreciate you circulating the list. And but just as a matter of protocol, Nandini, do you prefer the board members come to you and then you would connect us to staff, or do you want us to go directly to Pat?
Yes, I'd like to
I
be
didn't mean to
involved.
cut you out.
I would like.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Just a couple of points, and I'd love to see if it were possible to understand better the pipeline of possible preservation requests that are going to be coming at us. I think we all are sensitive to the fact that we sort of discuss as a concept the fact that a lot of LIHTC housing is going to start timing out. But I don't know what that really means or how that maps across the state. If we had that information, I just think it would be helpful. I think it's always useful to size the universe while we're trying to make decisions about this. So if that were possible, I think, even just using age maybe as a proxy, because I do understand we don't know who's going to send in an application, but to see what that looks like would be helpful. The other point of information that I think would be really helpful, and Terry, you are of course most deeply engaged in this. We are a leader in the nation in building supportive housing, which is great. But there's a point in time, most supportive housing, at least with regard to the population who have experienced homelessness, it is geared to a population who have a severe and permanent disabling condition. And that's not an ever expanding universe of people. So the question that I think is important is what is the goal? How much permanent supportive housing do we want for which populations? And are we getting there? Are we halfway there? Are we, right? What I have learned in my experience is that Connecticut has potentially the largest stock of permanent supportive housing per capita of at least any community I've spoken with, which is great, by the way, and very necessary. It's why we have made substantial strides in Connecticut in ending homelessness. But are we getting there? Or because we keep putting permanent supportive housing units in when we can, which maybe is terrific, but just a sense from our advocates responsible, right, for, and I know they're not all for the homeless, Terry, there are other populations we seek to serve, but it'd be so helpful to know where are we, right, in terms of meeting that need. It's a similar question to how far are we from meeting the need for affordable housing, right, which is the big gap, of course. But with permanent supportive housing, I think it's a different question. So any information we could have on that, I think would be so helpful as we think about how to use precious dollars, which can only be used once, right?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for that. We have been talking internally here with, because we do have data, right? We get the data from the HMIS and by region, actually, of the homeless population that we have and how we can serve them better. And are we gonna get there with the 10%, or 20% that we do? I don't think so. So we're trying to have a meeting. We're probably going to have a meeting with CHFA and the staff at DOH and Steve, because we do have a consultant looking at it. And I actually got a report back on where are those numbers and how we're gonna respond to that. Absolutely, that's part of what we want to do.
Hey, Pat, just something to think about, and I'm not suggesting you need to do it this way, but you gave a pretty long list there, again, of things that I think are all important. But I heard Nandini also mention that some of these you might use in the focus groups, right? And as much as I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one, but I think the value for me is kind of hearing from all the other board members as well, as opposed to having 10 different people call you. So, I mean, one thing you might consider is take out the ones that you think you're going to have in the focus group, and then take the ones that this team can kind of talk about and use it at one of these meetings, so we can say, all right, here are 10 things that we need to discuss. We can kind of talk through them, make some decisions on it, and then once you get other feedback, or once you get feedback from the developers and others on the other ones, you can come back to us and say, this is what we've heard. Again, just something to consider, not suggesting we do it that way, but I figured it might be easier than having 10 people calling you, talking one-on-one.
To Tim's point, though, I think what may happen is I start to digest, and as we all do, the points that were just made, they're all very valid. But I think we'll get reinforcement on some real areas of concern through these discussions in the meetings. So I think that we're going to be able to prioritize somewhat by feedback we get among ourselves, of course, but also from the participants as well as the stakeholders throughout the marketplace. So it'll be interesting to see how that helps us focus on a roadmap.
Is it a true statement then that some of those topics might fall off? Because they kind of pale in comparison to other areas that are brought up to our, are brought up by the stakeholders we're talking to? Or
Some of them could, I
Yeah.
mean, these are issues that
we
we
flag,
determined that we think
Yeah.
we as an organization should consider.
Right.
And some of them are more policy based than what we might get from a developer or
Mhm.
another state.
Some of that might be also operational.
Right.
And that, so we have to look at which one are policies that we want in the QAP and which one are operational that the staff has to take a look at.
I can already give you the answer on the total, limiting the total development cost.
Okay,
oh,
All right.
totally,
But that's why I think we need to have that, I mean, it'd be good to have the input from the stakeholders, but again, the stakeholders don't have the final word. There's
Right, exactly,
important policy
yeah.
implications that we have to have to do it. We probably want to need some time on your schedule after we solicit input, that we can then have a fulsome discussion in this body to make its decision.
I have one other thing to add to the list that probably wouldn't be able to get figured out for this next QAP, but I think it's worth a conversation. Is I've been having conversations with the Hartford Land Bank and the Cleveland Housing Partnership. The Hartford Land Bank is hot on trying to use LIHTC for home ownership, and it seems like the Cleveland Housing Partnership is one of the few organizations in the country that's done this successfully. But I guess there's, in the IRS code, there's a provision for home ownership where the affordability only extends for 15 years if it's used for home ownership. And what the Cleveland Housing Partnership does is they build mostly single family homes, some two families, but at the end of the 15 years, they end up selling the houses to whomever lives there and qualifies. And they, they sell them for, very, very low amounts. But what was appealing to me is for a couple of reasons. One, in trying to address concentrated poverty. So, in cities like Hartford, where the city of Hartford is reluctant to support new traditional LIHTC projects, I think they would be a lot more receptive to this. I think, organizations that are promoting deconcentration of poverty would be more receptive to this as well, where, it might be a vehicle to use in more distressed areas. So obviously there's a lot of work that would have to go into kind of figuring out how it works. So that's why I said it'd probably be more appropriate for a future QAP, but I think it's worth having a conversation, starting that conversation now, just to at least vet the idea.
I would have seconded that, Kathy. That's really interesting. I appreciate, though, as I look at poor Terry Nash, the fact that you said that could be further out, because that sounds complicated. But I'd love, Terry, to think about whether we might be able to invite guests from Cleveland to address the group, or at least those of us who are willing, to commit some time to it. I'd love to hear directly from Cleveland, Kathy, about the experience, and perhaps the Hartford Land Bank. So maybe we could do a special session just to discuss that and think forward on it.
We do have some information on that topic. We had looked at it some time ago when we were trying to think of how to address home ownership in the QAP. And Mark Shelburne, who had been a consultant of ours, has good knowledge, as of course would Ohio. Ohio, you are correct, is about the only state that has developed a model that works, and they invest in it very heavily. So we can certainly provide that to you while we think about the timing for inviting the Ohio folks to talk to us about a future inclusion of home ownership in the QAP.
So Terry, but that would be like after we get through the.
Oh, yeah. I think so. Thank you.
We have a pretty tight schedule. So if we're gonna look at something more radical like that, we have to go a little further. But also I just wanna mention it, when we'll talk about it, because we do have resources for homeownership and we will, the Department of Housing. So, complicated with the tax credit right now, I think it needs more discussion, and we should be open to look at what Cleveland is doing. But we'll do it later in the process.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Getting close to 12. Staff, you okay?
Yeah.
You guys?
I guess, Pat, if we just quickly, Commissioner, if I may, do you have easily digestible summary data of that shows the past applications and rankings? I recall seeing that through our board stuff. If you could just research, so we could see like just how it's worked in the real world. For those of us who haven't been on
What
mortgage
is
committee
produced.
haven't looked at it.
You want to break down by points?
I want to.
All the awardees are on the website, but it's just high level.
Yeah, it's just high level, right? But just kind of like the way this, what I want to know is, okay, we have all these various points for these different categories. I want to know what points really drive it, right? So I'm sure the developers know that, okay, I know here's what I really have to deliver on, and I don't have to worry about some of this other stuff. Like there's only a point, you know, that here that I don't really care, and no one ever gets that point, or everyone gets that point.
Well, I can tell you that doesn't happen. The point is chased by everybody.
All right, well, just whatever you got.
Yeah.
But there are some that drive.
Yeah, some that will
Yeah.
make a difference in
Just
that.
a sense of the math.
Yes, yeah, we do.
Because
Yeah,
we do about
absolutely.
what, 70 points, because that's kind of the average, right? 70 and up.
Yep.
Get funding. So what gets to that 70 points, right?
So everybody goes for every point in the financial or the low income targeting area, the
Right.
first
Right,
section, every point,
because if you don't, you're not gonna get it.
right?
Got it. Well, that's kind of
Yeah.
stuff you need.
Then a lot of them are site-based. If it's in an opportunity area, it automatically gets more points.
Right.
Then if it's not, the sustainability category was expanded in this last QAP to be 13 possible points. So that's.
Does everyone
that's a
get
big
that
one.
too?
Not all of them. I don't think they go for the
Mhm.
max, due to the cost of implementing those measures,
That's some of the things we
When
want.
you run against that other tension of the cost per unit.
Right.
yeah,
right?
Of course, yeah.
So some of the things that we give points for could layer more costs on, create larger gaps and, require subsidy. It's a very difficult.
Tweening or whatever.
Yeah,
And, can we get costs from the Builders Association on construction? I know that, I mean, it should be the same, but it's not, because we have some requirements, but at least we get like the hard cost. And I think Greg, probably the Builders Association have information about costs of building multifamily, right?
Yes, and if we have specific requests too, we can get the economist to work on what else we need to pinpoint. They're pretty good at it, at least, and especially a lot of the general information from across the country is very helpful for comparative analysis as well.
Especially for the regional, probably for the New England region, because we.
Yes.
Yes, but that would be great. So the staff trying to get some information, I think it would be helpful.
yeah, they're all up. There's an international builders convention somewhere this week, I think, out Midwest or something like that.
Next week, we have our annual meetings in IBS in Las Vegas, and we'll all be together. I'll follow up on it. Because I have my chief economist doing quite a bit of work. He actually spoke in Connecticut a couple times on a lot of these issues and related issues. And it's extremely helpful to the groups that have requested it.
Thank you, Greg. That'd be great. Any other comment or question before we end the meeting?
We have approval of minutes.
Oh. Can I have an approval of the minutes? A motion to approve the minute.
I'd like to move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second,
Is it okay if we all vote? We can all vote, right?
I have to abstain. I wasn't at the last meeting.
Well, my understanding is when you're approving.
Right.
Meeting you
Right.
weren't before, you're not necessarily approving the content.
The,
of
the
it.
content, right?
Look at
You're
the minutes
approving
that-
that they've been submitted.
Showing that These are the minutes and, you know, you're.
Formally approving them to be posted publicly. That's really what the
Right.
vote is about.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that's Jerry asking. Jerry, one of the commissions I'm on went through this with a lawyer because sometimes you lack a quorum. So just to explain, that's really what the vote on the minutes is.
Thank you, Lisa. Any comments? I have a motion and a second, right? Any other comments?
I just want to thank Terry Nash because Terry is a little bit uncelebrated. She does so much work on this process and is this great font of the historical knowledge on it. And it's great, Terry, that you're still leading this process. And thanks to the other staff, Pat, I really appreciated your comments today. This is an important process, and I think we're really honored to have staff that takes it so seriously and is willing to engage in the feedback from the board. So thank you to you all, with a highlight on Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All those in favor say aye. I think you
Aye.
put your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Moved.
A second.
Second,
All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.